and that's the magic of the internet. Welcome. Thanks for joining us once again. I am Dan Schmidt along with Steve Bartylla. This is the Deer Talk Now podcast and Ian Sanchez, our crack producer. Before we get started, we've got some really cool things we're going to talk with Steve. Steve and I have done this first topic together many, many times, but I want to tell you guys, if you aren't a trapper, if you know a trapper, or if you want to get started, this is a cool product. Just check it out. This is brand new from our sister publication called The Trapper, America's first and foremost trapping title. It's called The Trapper Yearbook. It's $10, free shipping. It is such a cool little thing. I want to show you what we got in this thing this year. It is a full-color poster of fur bearer tracks and identification. Put that up at your camp. If you're managing for your turkey populations or whatever, it's very cool. Just go to the Deer and Deer Hunting website. You can get a copy of that. Very neat. Just came in, brand new. Okay, so we have Steve here today. Steve, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely my pleasure.
You know, Steve and I have been friends for many years. Steve started off as a contributor for Deer and Deer Hunting, 30-some years ago. And the first thing that we ever did is when we hunted together, you had me down to your place in Illinois, is you knew I was a doe-killing fool. And I really get excited about that. And that's what we're going to talk about today is doe hunting, specifically management, because I know that's what you specialize in.
Sounds good.
So tell us, Steve, you know, a lot of people ask us, you know, what is your plan? What is, you know, if I want to manage my property for antlerless deer, what is your broad brush view or approach on any property when you take it, whether it's something you've been doing for a long time or if it's a brand new piece that you pick up?
Well, one thing a person has to really embrace if they're going to get into this, into the management end, is it's herding cats. And if you don't embrace that right from the beginning, if you don't go into it, we go into it with such messed up perceptions of what we're going to be able to achieve. It's not even funny. These are free-range deer. I've managed as much as contiguous 7,000-acre chunks of ground where, I mean, there might be a road through it, but I mean, we're talking one chunk. There's no properties inside this 7,000 acres of Midwestern prime dirt. It's still herding cats because you are, even in those ridiculously large properties, it is not going to work out as you have planned. These whitetails do not know what property lines are. You can get them to spend a disproportionate amount of time in as little as 40 acres, and that's the truth. But people take that truth and they stretch it into wild dreams that, okay, a disproportionate amount of time, all that means is I'm spending 50 plus 1 second % of my time on this property or more. I'm going to leave. Every darn deer leaves. Now, does, they have much smaller home ranges, but they are going to leave. They're going to immigrate, and those numbers are going to change all the time. And all we can do is really try to nudge the boulder a little bit in our direction. Now, I hopefully that kind of answers.
Yeah.
I lost track of what you actually asked.
And that's where it gets us on a start. So, and I completely agree with you when you say we go in there with these wild plans. I'm going to manage. I'm going to bring that. And let's not even get into buck to doe ratios. Let's just talk about deer populations. I'm going to manage that deer population to where I have it, you know, something that I can get my hands around, and I have, you know, not as many does, so bucks come through there. And the biggest problem, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody might take a look at that population in April or September or December and get three completely different ideas onto how many deer I have on my property.
That is exceedingly true, but I would actually say that the single biggest problem is that your neighbors aren't going to share your exact same goals. And if you are talking about, if you're trying to manage a 40-acre piece, I'm sorry to be this blunt, you ain't managing it. Right. When it comes to deer, now, everybody does. Everybody manages every single time they release a bolt, release an arrow, pull the trigger. Okay, but believing that on my 40 acres, I'm going to be able to alter the deer population in this area? I'm sorry, no, not unless your neighbors are bought in. And that gets to be a real slippery slope because most people don't want to tell you no. So they end up agreeing to it. But then the reality doesn't play out right, and next thing you know, they're shooting things, and now you hate your neighbors, and that's just, no, that doesn't work. The best you can do is control that little piece that you've got, and you're going to have ridiculous amounts of when you have a deer population that's too dang high, good luck. I've lived that many times. Heck, I was texting with you once when I shot 5 does in one sit in less than a half hour. And I brought 100% legal. I got tags for all of them. Okay, and I tagged every single one of them, and every single one was utilized. Yep. But I stopped after 5, even though I brought a second quiver, because I got too much work to do already here. And the next night, I went back in. I could have shot another 5, and because there's literally a line of deer waiting to get into this property. The social pressure gets to be so ignored, but yet so absolutely critical. You're only going to be able to hold X number of deer on a property, period, end of story. And when that property is better than the surrounding properties, guess what? There's often a waiting line coming in. And you go ahead and all you do is you're going ahead and you're removing 4 mouths from the neighbors.
And you're creating your own problems sometimes in a situation like that where if you have the food, he who has the food has the deer, and your neighbors don't, it could be that spigot that just doesn't turn off.
And what ends up happening a lot of times there that makes it even more complicated in a bad way is, a whole bunch of those deer you're feeding, they ain't betting on you. They're betting on those neighbors. And that's fine. That can actually work out to your advantage in a whole bunch of ways. But if you're trying to herd cats / manage deer, well, those does are going to smell good. And they're going to go back home. And now all of a sudden that 2.5-year-old buck, I'm just making this up, but that 2.5-year-old buck that you've pinned all your hopes on for next year, well, he jumps that fence to follow her. Now he's in extreme danger. It's quite honestly the best thing I think a real world hunter manager can do. By real world, I'm saying you're dealing with less than 500 acres.
That was my question.
Which is the majority of, we can sit there and talk about that 7,000 acre piece that I used to manage. Man, was that, but that doesn't apply to virtually anybody who's actually listening. The 40 acres that I used to own and manage does. Okay. In those situations, what you do is you identify, in my opinion, this is the approach that's worked best for me, identify the doe groups that are working towards your goals. You treat them like gold. They happen to be bedding on your property. They happen to be feeding on your property. And after a while, she even figures out you're up in that tree and she ain't sitting there stomping because she's been through there over and over.
She's not going to get killed.
She's cool. She's working towards your goals. So now I want to fill some doe tags. Who am I going to go after in that scenario? Not her. I'm going to go after that doe that's bedding on the other side of the fence, jumping the fence, feeding on me, and going back. And all I'm going to do is set up 50 yards off the fence line, covering the trail as they're going back and forth from the neighbors to my food and back. And are you going to change the world doing that? No, but you're nudging that boulder a little bit towards what we want. A little bit closer. And really, real world deer management, in my humble opinion, that's it right there. All you're doing is nudging that boulder a little bit. There's so dang many things we can't control. We are focusing on the few we can. And that makes a 2, 3, 4, 5% difference on a real world property. Even on the ridiculously large properties, you're only talking a 30, 40% difference. Deer die for so many reasons it's not even funny. Buck fights.
Yep.
Right there. And so many of them are dying months after that fight even occurred.
And there's nothing you can do about it.
Not a darn thing.
Okay, I'm talking with Steve Bartylla. This is the Deer Talk Now podcast brought to you by Mossberg Wildlife Research Center and others. Steve, we kind of jumped ahead there on my because I wanted to try to I kind of wanted to manage cats here, wrangle cats. Is we talked about a broad brush plan. One thing you brought up there about age classes is something I learned from you. I learned from John Ozoga. I learned from Charlie Alsheimer. And one thing that you kind of lit that light bulb for me, when you're talking about real world management, whatever you want to call it, if I want to shoot some does, okay, let me just tell you you tell me what you think of my approach here at home. Highly pressured, you know this land very well. Highly pressured, 40, 80, 100, if you're very lucky, 200 acre property. But I'm going to scale it back to all the guys in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Alabama who are hunting 40 or 80. How many does should I kill, they say? I say start with this. Start with one or possibly two. And then when they say which one should I kill, I say go off of age classes. And to your point, don't kill that 3 or 4. You don't know the age of it, but you know she's fully mature. I say set your watch for whenever your bow season starts. Take out the first yearling doe you see if you want meat, and start there. Do you think that is a reasonable approach for most guys who are in the real world are saying, how should I start and what age classes should I target?
Honestly, I hate to say this, but I think it depends 100% on your goals. If your goal to shoot that doe is to put meat in the freezer, go for it, buddy. The approach.
Go for anyone?
I think that the age class that you are targeting is about ideal for freezer meat,
right,
for crying out loud.
Right.
I mean, they're big enough. I hate to be sorry if I offend anybody, but the best meat out there is fawn, period, end of story.
It is, totally. Yeah.
And from a management standpoint, it is so ridiculous that we have this issue with shooting fawns. You mentioned some of the John Ozoga. I mean, Mike Heavens, I learned more from him than I can even begin to speak of. He'll be the first to tell you.
Shoot the fawn.
Why? Predators, they're the first to die. They're the first to die over all else being equal, of course. I'm not talking about that ancient doe who's an inch from death to begin with. When you're dealing with healthy deer, the very first to die are the fawns. It doesn't matter if we're talking predators. It doesn't matter if we're talking overwinter death. Okay, get rid of this idea. And this is really going to twist some people's socks into a bundle here. But you know what's really a great fawn for that guy owning a 40 to shoot? A buck fawn. Because he's going to disperse. He won't be there a year and a half later anyway. I mean, yeah, you might not be being as considerate to a neighbor 10 miles away, but you sure aren't impacted. And when you have low deer numbers, the last thing in the world and you're trying to build those deer, last thing in the world you want to do is shoot a doe, period. Because those does, you need to build those. And that's why it depends on so much what your goal is. If your goal is to fill the freezer, that's your goal. What you just described, hey, more power to you. If your goal is to build the deer numbers, don't be shooting that doe. You shoot that doe, you're literally being the definition of your own worst enemy. There's nubbin bucks, there's yearling bucks, there's all sorts of stuff out there that you can shoot that is not going to impact anywhere near to the extent the population.
What
going
about
forward.
if your goal is, hey, I just want more buck activity on this property during the pre-rut and the rut?
During the pre-rut and the rut, now you're really actually talking two different animals. Mm-hmm. During the pre-rut, that buck, all else being equal, he kind of likes to have his own man cave, is the way I see it. Someplace where I can go, I can crash. I don't have to worry about the kids running through the bedroom. I don't have to worry about my girlfriend, wife, whatever, coming down there and chewing on me, you need to. No, I'm just left the heck alone here. And for most of the year, I mean, yes, cool having other bucks there and stuff, but for most of the year, those bucks don't want to be around does and youngsters. they are actually making their lives more dangerous and far more stressful. Instead, he wants to be up here all by himself so he can see everything that's going on. And when I hear a twig snap, what the heck is that? I don't have to worry about it being that little doe. So in pre-rut, really you want to have your doe. Let me put it this way. At all times of the season, if you're managing your property and you have prime buck bedding on that property, identify that prime buck bedding and don't mess it up. Do not go in there and do a bunch of improvements around that buck bedding that's going to bring in a bunch of does and fawns and young bucks, because you do that and guess what? That Mr. Big, he probably isn't going to stick. He's going to move. So what you do is you leave those buck areas alone. If what you're trying to do is have a tremendous rut hunt, you leave the does alone until after the rut. You do everything you can to treat them.
You leave them all alone?
I leave them all alone.
If you want good rut hunting, what you're saying is don't kill any does.
I mean, if you want to go ahead and take out a fawn here, let me rephrase. If you want really good rut hunting and you are counting on your does to have it, if you're going to shoot any does, you're not shooting them out of the stands you're going to be hunting during the rut. Set yourself up low impact. And if you're doing habitat improvement, make low impact, high odds places that you can go and you can pluck those deer from. If you've got a chainsaw and a bag of seeds, you can do stuff like that. Okay. It's not going to be your best buck stand. You leave that alone. But during the rut, your doe numbers are huge. And even shooting that fawn. Okay. Yeah. Depending on where you are, if we're talking the UP of Michigan, on a good year, 5% of them are going to come into estrus, that fawn, because they're going to get big enough to reach physical and physiological thresholds to achieve estrus. You're talking Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, you're looking at, on just a normal year, you're looking at 80+% of those fawns are entering estrus that very first year. So you shoot that fawn the opening day, guess what? It ain't coming into estrus during late season. Okay, and to throw a little bit of curveball in here, and then I'll shut up, is for as much as we talk about how these bucks run wild during the rut, I'm sorry, I don't see that. I have managed ridiculous numbers of acres and ridiculous numbers of places, and it is rare, except for on the small properties. The less than 500 acre properties, yes, you're going to have some show up, but here's the key. If you're observing that area, you already know these deer. Now, during the rut, I see very, 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 very few bucks mature bucks that I don't know. When that actually goes through the roof, post-rut, when those fawns start coming into estrus. Because they have to reach those physical and physiological thresholds, it takes them longer. It's a week, 2 weeks, a month, depending on when they were born after peak breeding, when they're coming in. That's when I end up picking up those mature bucks I haven't seen before.
Are you guys picking up? I hope you're taking notes, because this is great stuff. I've known Steve for a long time, but I'm still learning things every time we talk. Deer Talk Now is brought to you by Wildlife Research Center and the new Golden Rope Scent Rope Kit. The kit comes with 4 ounces of Golden Rope Scent Concentrate, 3 cable ties, and 3 scent ropes made of proprietary fibers meant to absorb the maximum amount of scent. Simply saturate the rope in your scent of choice, hang it from a branch, and watch the trail cam photos come flying in. For more information, go to wildlife.com. Okay, last question for this episode of Deer Talk Now podcast, brought to you by 10 Point and Hoyt, among others. Steve, I know how you do this on your Deertopia properties, we're going to call them, because I've hunted them. Let's revisit what you said about hunting does versus property lines, because I know you have a very unique way of doing it.
I think it's up to all of us to figure out what works in the stuff for us. There is no right and wrong way.
You called them evil at one point. A certain level, a certain age class of doe, a certain doe on the landscape. I'll never forget it. You called them evil.
And wow, did I ever get grief for that. But I do think it's up to each of us to figure out where our sweet spot is, all that type of stuff. And I'm sorry, but I think it is the ultimate in arrogance for somebody like me to sit here and tell all you people this is what you need to do. What I'm sharing is what I do.
Well, and that's what we want to hear. Is we want to hear what works for you, what doesn't.
For me,
work for you.
for one thing, I ain't setting a stand within 50 yards of that fence line. Period. End of story. Why? Because I want my neighbors to do the same. And I talk to them both. They don't have to. They don't have to do it. But I am going to set every stand 50 yards or more off that property line to start with. Okay. The quote-unquote evil does, which there's nothing evil about them, but
You're being
they're
facetious.
not working towards our goals, are those does that are bedding over on the neighbor, getting up hour before dark, jumping the fence, coming over, eating our food all night, and then jumping the fence and going back to the neighbor. Not only are they taking money out of our pockets, because obviously this stuff costs money, okay, but they are the ones that, in my opinion, are by far the highest risk of leading that buck astray. Okay, that buck that is actually, I'm just making this up. I've got this buck cooperating. He's doing what I want. He's bedding over here. I've got the doe, so he's checking my doe concentrations on this property. Man, he is gift wrap. But within that now are those does that are jumping that fence. And I guarantee when they smell pretty, he's following them back across that fence, and now he's spending all day over there. Though when I have to remove does, those are the does that I'm targeting and why. But I'm setting up an honest 50 yards off that fence line because I don't want it to drop over there. I don't want to have to go ahead and call that. And yeah, I have all this in place beforehand.
Right.
But I really don't enjoy it when they're calling me over and over and over and over and trashing my sanctuaries. Well, if I don't enjoy that, maybe I shouldn't put them in the same position.
It's twofold for you. And I agree with you. You're talking about messing up a neighbor, but it's also you're talking about trying to target when you can target deer that really aren't leading towards your goals.
And another great example, that doe. What most people don't realize, and geez, it took me way too long to grasp this. You can train deer to fear anything. You can train deer to literally accept anything, including an outfitter driving their hunter every single day in the morning and pre-dawn to the base of the stand on an ATV while that 150-inch buck happens to be sitting on that point, and this is a true story watching all of this. Yep. Okay, watches the hunter get off, climb up the tree, watches a whole bunch of does, fawns, young bucks come into the pond to drink. 4 hours later, here comes the ATV to pick up the hunter. The hunter climbs in. Oh, 3 hours before dark, here he comes again. And that buck is sitting up there on that point. And it took him approximately 2.5 to 3 weeks before he decided, oh, I know there's a hunter in that stand. But so do all those does and fawns and young bucks, and he ain't doing squat to them. So I'm going to go get a drink. Okay, you can train them to accept, and as I said, 100% real story happened at Bluff Country Outfitters with Tom Inderbo. God knows why he hired me as a consultant to start with, because that man had already forgot more than I'll ever know.
One of the most knowledgeable guys.
And there I am sitting there lecturing him on how you can't do this, Tom. You
and
can't.
He probably just sat there
it won't work.
Yep. Yep.
Well, I understand what you're saying. And what he doesn't say is, but yet, I've done this many years since before I knew you, and man, do we ever kill a whole bunch of stuff doing it. Yep. You can train these deer to accept and fear anything, so make darn sure those does that are out there that, hey, they pick you up, they look up at you a couple times and go back to what they're doing. Don't shoot her. Shoot that one that will not leave you alone and keeps pounding and pounding and snorting for the next 3 hours.
Then she's getting taken out.
Yes. Yeah. So those are, generally speaking, for most real-world hunters, there's more to it than this, but for the real-world hunters, shoot the ones that are leading your bucks. If you're going to shoot does, shoot the ones that are leading your bucks astray and or those that are being major pains in your butt when you're hunting out there. Why in the world, if I'm going to remove one of these deer, am I not going to want to remove the ones that are working against my goals rather than ones that's working for them. Of course, I want the ones they're working against.
Well, thank you, Steve. I know we could talk about this for hours, and we often do. But there's certain things here that if you guys want to read more about this or watch more about this, the Deer and Deer Hunting website, Steve's articles are there. And then also all the videos, the Deertopia videos, the Grow 'em Big, Hunt 'em Big videos that we have on our YouTube page. It's simple. Just go to YouTube, DDH Online, and you're going to find them there. Everything you could possibly want to know, not only about management, about deer hunting, doe hunting strategies, things like that. So we're going to come back at you again next Thursday for another brand new episode. All we ask you guys to do is like and subscribe to wherever you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast. And again, if you're listening to the podcast, video versions are available at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. You find the platform with Deer and Deer Hunting on it, you're going to find them there. For Steve Bartylla, I am Dan Schmidt. We will catch you next Thursday for another episode of Deer Talk Now. The Deer Talk Now podcast is brought to you by Mossberg, Wildlife Research Center, Traditions Firearms, Outdoor Edge Knives, Hoyt Archery, and 10 Point Crossbows.